Welcome to Checkmate on ValorTube, where you can tube bigly. Here's a little presentation on Ukraine. On the knife edge is what I'm calling it. We have some tense times in Ukraine right now, and this is not lost on anyone. I thought I would get on here to make a video, help you make some sense of it, and try to cut out too much ephemeral history of the place and what is going on over in that area now, and just make it so that you can synthesize the headlines and follow us on Checkmate and be a contributor to the conversation. And away we go. As I said, I am Checkmate, and our motto here is opinions formed by faith and experience. Those who've watched other Checkmate videos have seen both the faith part and my experience as a diplomat, and I hope that knowing this part of the world that we're going to talk about today, that we'll get a little more into the experiential piece of it. Hope you enjoy. I wanted to take you through Ukraine and Russia, and it usually pays to begin with geography. And what we have here is we have the big bad bear, which is Russia, and I'm circling it now. And then here along this political line is Ukraine. Here's the Black Sea, here's the Mediterranean. Israel would be down in this area here where the laser pointer is, and you can see the rest of Europe. Ukraine fundamentally is more important to the Russians than it is to Western Europe and to the United States. Unless you happen to be a Biden, we won't touch too heavily on that. But here's your frame of reference. You will hear certain countries come up again and again in this brief. Russia, Belarus, which is right here, and of course Ukraine, as well as the Black Sea. So I didn't want to get too deeply into Ukrainian history, especially Ukrainian history vis-a-vis Russia, or the Russian Empire as it was known at one point. It was also known as Scythia at one point. There were a number of kingdoms. There were the Scythians, the Dacians, of course the Byzantines, the Romans, the Mongols came through a couple of times, and I wasn't going to get hung up in that. All I was going to say is that Russo-Ukrainian tension dates back to the 9th century when both Moscow and Kiev were small cities that commanded various empires. As we know, Ukraine ended up through World War II being a key battleground between the Nazis and the Russians, and was resumed by occupation by the Soviets up until 1991, when the Soviet bloc, for all intents and purposes, disappeared. It was shortly thereafter that what became known as the Chicken Kiev speech was given by George H.W. Bush. Throughout the Cold War, and Checkmate has talked about this in other movies, throughout the Cold War, there was a strategic consideration called the stability paradigm. The stability paradigm dictated that owing to the existential implications of a full nuclear exchange between the West and the Soviet Union, that there was a premium placed on stabilizing different parts of the world, lest they tip into a cycle that would result in that full nuclear exchange. Considering the modus vivendi tended towards stabilities between the West and the Soviet Union, modus vivendi being Latin for what essentially amounts to method of disagreement, stability always ended up being a prime consideration, and given the nuclear standoff, I would argue it was perfectly valid. After 1991, however, thinking within Washington, D.C. failed to evolve that, as former CIA Director Woolsey put it, the Soviet dinosaur collapsed in favor of a jungle full of snakes. And we never really looked at freedom as being the best antidote to what was happening with these emerging states. Instead, we wanted them to put their faith back into more stable forms of government and not change too rapidly. Whether or not this will have been the right thing is a matter of personal opinion. I believe that George H.W. Bush screwed up a marvelous opportunity. Nevertheless, the issue remained focused largely on the what was a bilateral nuclear balance. However, Ukraine found itself in an interesting position. A number of Soviet nuclear forces were still in the country of Ukraine. In 1994, the Budapest Memorandum was signed, and the chief signatories were the US, the UK, Russia, and then later France and China added their names, and these were the members of the Security Council. And what they came up with was about an 8-point paper, I believe it was 8 points, that guaranteed the sovereignty of Ukraine and its security over the long haul in exchange for denuclearization. This, on the part of certain Ukrainian populace, really sticks in their craw because some will argue they never had to give up their nukes. Czekmate, having worked on the nuclear portfolio at one point in his life, fails to see how Ukraine could have maintained a credible nuclear deterrent and a secure one at that, especially with the number of weapon smuggling problems that have come out of Ukraine through the 1990s and through the first 2 decades of the 2000s. It was a pragmatic move, but to this day, Ukraine will argue that they have been betrayed in the face of this. Paralyzed by rampant corruption, Ukraine is probably, I think it competes for second or third most corrupt country in Europe. Russia always occupying the #1 slot, apparently. Ukraine tipped into a color revolution in 2004 that resulted in a change in power from what amounts to a Russian puppet to a West European puppet, backed mightily by money that came out of the European left. And over time, it was a very halting affair, a very unstable government. Both the Western Europeans and the United States continued to make themselves involved in Ukrainian politics, as did the Russians. And Ukraine, for all intents and purposes, became up for sale. Fast forward to 2013, 2014, we have what was known as the Maidan Revolution with the Maidan Massacre. And there are some people in Ukraine and Russia who believe that the Maidan Revolution, also known as the Revolution of Dignity, they believe that the event was staged in order to once again change the government, that there was a massacre utilizing Georgian snipers, and that the entire affair was bought and paid for by, once again, left-wing players in Western Europe. I do not know the truth value of this. I tend to believe that it was staged, and so in the midst of this chaos and the rampant corruption, and the corruption was cited as the #1 overriding concern and complaint of the masses. Corruption has just been endemic no matter who is in charge in Ukraine. That coming out of it, the government pledged to do something about corruption. And it was in April of that year that we had this minor issue with the Bidens and Burisma. And it was the following month that the Russians blitzed on the Crimean Peninsula and took it over. One can't help but think it could be considered a cheap shot that I put these two in here in such close proximity to the Maidan Revolution. But one can't help but think that with Joe Biden being the point person and his son personally benefiting, that this may have made the Russians take notice that they had to consolidate their position with respect to their naval forces in Crimea. Russia, ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union, has maintained a large naval presence in Crimea. They require it. They need it. By this point in 2014, they were actively engaged in Syria, in the Levant, and the Crimea acted as their umbilical into Syria. And this goes to many things. Paul Lair and I, who has his own channel here on ValorTube, have discussed the centrality in both the Ukrainian issue as well as Russian involvement in Syria, the centrality of liquid natural gas, because that is the primary organ of power economically that the Russians have in the world. It is crucial to their survival economically, but it is also the lever that Putin wishes to play in terms of his consolidation of influence over Europe. And so maintaining the umbilical to the Middle East, Crimea was an essential player. He had to take it over. And it was shortly after that that the Normandy format convened. And what this was, that this was France and Germany representing the European Union, and Russia and Ukraine in a quadpartite, meaning four parts, a quadpartite arrangement. And the Normandy meetings didn't accomplish much other than they agreed that the Normandy format, which you will hear a lot of in the news, was the most viable way to spur progress on the stability of Ukraine going forward. It was, however, shortly after that that Russia staged its soft invasion of Ukraine. These were irregular forces of the Russian military intelligence known as the GRU. They have special operations elements that they put to use in what is called irregular warfare. And what this is that these are uniformed and non-uniformed members of the Russian military who are experts, hard fighters, well paid, went in and began fomenting separatist tension in the area of Donetsk and Luhansk. As a consequence of this, going into the winter months, the Minsk protocols were established, and this was a bilateral moment between Russia and Ukraine and the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE. To many Americans, the OSCE doesn't tend to factor into their thinking when they think Europe. Most people think of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or they think of the European Union, maybe. The Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe gets a lot of attention and diplomatic investment from Ukraine and Russia because they are both players there, but also OSCE combines all East and West members of Europe, uh, from Portugal on the Atlantic through Kazakhstan. The reach of the OSCE is very far. And the unfortunate thing for the OSCE, it's a consensus organization, so it leads to the accusation that they don't get much done. Nevertheless, the Minsk protocols and the Normandy format are things that if you read the news, you will see are continually being presented as the most viable paths forward. To that end, in the past 7 days, we have seen both France and Germany engaging on the Ukraine issue with Russia and the United States. They make no pretenses about the fact that they favor the Normandy format, and the Russians, in the past 3 days, have returned to the idea that Ukraine must fully implement the Minsk protocols. This is set against the settling of the ceasefire that came as a result of the Minsk protocols, albeit a halting one, in Luhansk and Donetsk, which we'll see in a moment. For all intents and purposes, Donetsk and Luhansk, which are on this map of Ukraine, Donetsk and Luhansk are right in this area, or I pulled it from Wikipedia. I'm sad to say, but it is a decent map. This is the area here, and the Sea of Azov, which is right here, is down in this area here. The Minsk Protocol establishes the ceasefire and establishes these buffers between these autonomous regions and Ukraine and Russia. Now, what's interesting about Donetsk and Luhansk is that this is an old play in the Russian playbook that during the reign of Joseph Stalin, in many of the neighboring countries of Russia, of Soviet Russia, Stalin would infiltrate Russian language speaking people, Russian language experts, and he would place them in these places and then mandate Russian education so that the native languages and the native dialects became secondary to much more formal Russian education. And in the case of Ukraine, on its east and somewhat north edges, it became heavily Russophone. I would argue um, just about from Kiev eastward, this was largely an issue to varying degrees. Obviously, the closer you get to the border, the more fealty these border provinces have to Russia itself here. This was certainly the case in Donetsk and Luhansk. Luhansk is here on the northern is the northern piece of territory divided by this line. Donetsk is here. So Donetsk and Luhansk here, as well as Crimea, have heavy Russian populations, and therefore the Russians feel they justify their presence as defending the enfranchisement of Russian-speaking peoples and culturally Russian peoples. What this comes down to is that this is an old Russian playbook where the Russians seek to put as much, Moscow would be right where the laser pointer is, right about here. They want to put, owing to their experience with Napoleon and the Nazis in two large wars, they want to put as much Russian territory as they can between themselves and Western Europe, which would be off the map, but it would be out in this direction here. This is Poland right here. So one of the things that the Russians did as the Soviet Union collapsed is that there became known as a phenomenon known as frozen conflicts. And where these places are, I'll just run through them very quickly. Nagorno-Karabakh, which is not highlighted on this map, which is right here between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And the Russians end up with a minor presence there through a military presence they maintain in Yerevan, the capital of Armenia here. There is South Ossetia, which is right here in north-central Georgia. Abkhazia, where they maintain bases, which is here in the panhandle of Georgia. There's actually another one not mentioned on this map where they keep a military base called Batumi, and it is in the extreme southwest corner of the Republic of Georgia here. And fun fact, that's actually where the Russians trained the Palestinian Liberation Organization to undertake terrorism. That was their summer camp, was in that area there. And then there's Transnistria, which is on the right bank of the Dniester River here in Moldova. And it is also, of course, on the southwest border, the extreme southwest border of Ukraine. Not the extreme southwest, but the southwestern border of Ukraine. The Russians maintain a presence here as well, and you'll see that in future slides. Once again, here is Luhansk and Donetsk and Crimea. What this means is that effectively the General Staff, along with Belarus, which is right up here, which is an allied state to the Russians, has extended its reach against NATO to have something of a perimeter right in through here. Turkey, of course, is in NATO. Romania is in NATO. Poland is in NATO. And so this concept of strategic space, or what we call consolidation of the Russian near abroad. I know that these are terms of art that are coming at you really fast. But what they've done is they've set up tripwires all along here. This is a very big deal to the Russian General Staff. And Putin needs to keep the Russian General Staff on his side. Although being an ex-spook, he has his predilections on whom he lets into his inner circle. Nevertheless, the frozen conflicts serve a tripwire for Moscow. So we get into developments much more, and you see a variation of a theme in terms of the naval forces in terms of the naval forces that have gathered together. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, my slide is not changing as it was. There we go. What we see here with naval forces is there have been forces that have come down from the Baltic through the Eastern Atlantic, through the Straits of Gibraltar. And yesterday they were here. Today they are off the coast of Sicily. The Russians maintain a port in Tartus in Syria. They maintain a naval facility. They've been known to go to Latakia as well. And Israel is right here. And so they have maintained a submarine screen as well as a surface warfare screen. And what it looks like they're doing is they are collapsing on this area here, along with naval shore batteries, which are here in Tartus. And they're sending Russian invasion forces, and they have sent, they're already here conducting exercises. You'll see that in a future slide. what they're doing is they're effectively setting up a blockade around this area here. This is Ukraine in here. This is Russia here. Moldova's inland here, and Romania is here. So over the past couple of days, they've taken up station here and they've announced exercises. There are submarines that are available and these are Kilo class submarines, and this is the bulk of the Russian Kilo class submarine fleet. They're very quiet while they're at sea. They make a great deal of noise while they're snorkeling. And there's also what they call carrier killers in the form of Udaloy and Slava class destroyers and cruisers. The Slava class cruisers are kind of the big capital ship. H.I. Sutton, who put this together, I believe that his theory as to what the Russian plan is correct, is that the Russians intend to consolidate a fire chain from Tartus to Greece of a carrier killing capability. The United States Navy, and as of this moment NATO, are focused heavily on aircraft carriers. The USS Truman, the French aircraft carrier de Gaulle, and the Italian aircraft carrier are all working together right now in this area. They just finished an exercise today called Neptune Strike. And the idea is that the Russians want to form a carrier killing capability to basically fence off this choke point. Now, carriers would not transit into the Black Sea. They just wouldn't do it because they could send jets from here all day and all night into this area if they really wanted to. But it is a show of force. At the same time, it's giving the carrier something to think about from a surface warfare standpoint. These submarines are running loose, and it's giving the carrier also something to think about with the destroyers that they bring along with them, that they have to keep an eye on these submarines. It is believed that the Slava class cruiser that went into the Black Sea will come back out and be a part of this fire chain. And so you end up with the Russian Navy really maneuvering very expertly to have its amphibious forces in this area, supported probably by a submarine as a contingency. Submarines wandering around the Mediterranean, giving the aircraft carrier something to think about, as well as a fire chain of carrier killing missiles along here. Again, a show of force. Really, if we got into a fight between NATO and Russia, under NATO command, I'm not sure how we would do. Under US command, we would do okay. We wouldn't do badly. But that's not something anybody wants. Again, it's a show of force, and it is the Russians maneuvering. So this is the Black Sea. This is Ukraine up in this area here. This is Russia in this area here. And what has happened in the past day is that the Russians have notified that they are going to hold a gunnery exercise. They issued notices to mariners and notices to airmen that various air traffic and sea corridors in these areas highlighted in red would be subject to live fire exercises. This has created a lot of headaches for the Ukrainians, and the belief is that for the duration that the Russians take to decide whether or not they will initiate hostilities, that this is in effect a naval blockade, preventing merchant shipping from getting into Ukrainian ports here and Odessa here. The Ukrainian Seaports Authority is working on workarounds. Apparently, they have analysts that are working full time with respect to what the Russians are doing at any given moment as ships would transit these areas. And the Ukrainian foreign minister has even publicly said, and this is noted on the Czekmate's group, that this is in effect a blockade, this is illegal, and that he wants to see a complaint made that would blockade Russian ships from entering port, because that is what they're doing to Ukraine. The sluggish pace of international diplomacy when it comes to law of the sea, I don't know that we're going to get there before this exercise ends or is terminated for hostilities or terminated for another reason. So this very busy slide is put out by the Jane's Defense Group in London. They're one of the most renowned defense consultancies on the planet. They generally speaking speak directly to the largest defense contractors on earth, but their products are also used by ministries of foreign affairs and ministries of defense, to include our own Defense Department and State Department, are used quite widely because they're very credible. They also tend to get a lot of information first. This slide is available on Fighting Checkmates. I would recommend you go see it there because it is this busy, but it lays down a very good explanation of what is happening with the Russian disposition of forces. I will not dwell on this slide because it is once again so busy and I can't really zoom in on it. Instead, I'll use as a excuse me, I will use as a basis of reference to show comparable sizes what exactly it is the Russians and Ukrainians are up against. Here's the Crimean Peninsula. Here's the area called Rostov-on-Don. And here are some rear area logistics hubs for the purposes of replenishing frontline Russian units, which are concentrated here as well as here. And now that the amphibious group has moved into the Black Sea, there's an entire brigade of naval infantry afloat, which could theoretically go anywhere along this coastline that they needed to put them. They could also just put them ashore on Crimea and have them fight in with the forces that are there. But if you will notice that the Ukrainian military, and this is based on older data, is highly dispersed. If this holds up, that it looks like the Ukrainians are actually looking at an insurgency and counterinsurgency plan for their method of doing warfare. And then, of course, over here, this lone little bubble, that is also Russian, and that is in the Transnistrian area of Moldova. That's one of the separatist area. So, as you can see, the numbers of professional soldiers really favor the Russians. So the diplomatic moves are really quite fascinating. As I mentioned, President Macron of France has gone to Moscow. He was frankly treated rather insultingly by Putin. I bluntly believe that Putin just was not in the mood to deal with him. I also think that Putin wanted to impress upon him who was in charge. Macron went on to Kiev, and then he went on to Berlin. And subsequently returned to Paris, and he spoke with President Biden. Likewise, Germany's new Chancellor Scholz came to Washington, met with President Biden. He is due as well to travel to Moscow. The Spanish, I believe, foreign minister has been to Moscow and left already. And then today, Foreign Secretary Liz Truss of the United Kingdom was in Moscow. And the meeting there, amid the very tepid, not very, but the tepid relations between the UK and Moscow, appeared to be downright frosty when, in the middle of a presser with Foreign Minister Lavrov abruptly departed and just wanted no part of it any further. All of this is being tracked in the Checkmates group on ValorTube. I hope you'll take a look at us. Please bear with us if you're not able to sign up for ValorTube. It is a work in progress. Out of a request from friends, I decided to make this my information repository. And as Checkmate, I can tell you that there's a lot of information coming out. I'm trying to synthesize it for my own good, but I'm also trying to synthesize the things that really matter and just give you a flavor of the complexity of this operation from the Russian viewpoint. The Ukrainians are being really quite mum. They've been very disciplined about their communications messages. There's not a lot of press getting into the interior, but come over to the Fighting Checkmates. I write up a lot of commentary. Paul Lair, who's my partner in crime on the biblical implications of all of this stuff, has been kind enough on paulthepoke.com to post some of my write-ups. I do not proofread these things. I usually pound them out and just send them. And I probably should proofread them, but I hope you'll appreciate the unvarnished nature of it all. So that brings this presentation to a close. Am I finished? Not by a long shot. You'll have to come give us a glance over on Fighting Checkmates. I apologize for the halting nature of this presentation, but I was trying to fit a great deal of stuff into one presentation that has now just hit the 30-minute point. And I thank you for your attention. I hope you'll come join us at ValorTube on the Fighting Checkmates group. I may know a guy who can let you into the group. All you have to do is sign up for ValorTube. And this is Checkmate's chosen home just because they give me the free run of the place. And try to remember that our Lord really is in firm control, for all these things must come to pass. Do not be afraid. I don't see this going nuclear, even though we have indications that a bomber task force has just arrived in the United Kingdom. The Russians are about to undertake a nuclear exercise. These are precautionary, they are standard, they are the kinds of things that militaries do when adults are in the room. So for some perspective on all of this and running commentary, come on over to ValorTube, check out the Fighting Checkmates, join the group, add to the discussion. I get only a little bit of comments, but I know that people are reading them, and I'd love to get your opinion, love to get your feedback. So with that, God bless you, and we'll see you soon.